Some of them have been, see, the standard Hebrew text used by biblical scholars is the Leningrad text. I think it's from the 11th century AD. So are you doing something else?
No, I'm finding a quote to see, because you're
it sounds as if you're doing something online.
No, I'm basically just trying to find a scholarly quote where they give the accuracy. So, it's not a
well, maybe the scholars disagree. But I said that
because that's why when I said 99%, you disagreed. So I'm trying to
oh, absolutely, yeah, because it's not true. Well, everyone knows that. Some texts have been the Dead Sea Scrolls contains most of the biblical books, and some of them very closely resemble the Leningrad text that we have, which is the standard text used by biblical scholars today, by translators, I mean. But there are other texts that were in the Dead Sea that were quite different. For example, Jeremiah has a much shorter, or is it? No, I think it's a much. I would need to check this, but it's not the same book. The contents has different chapters, additional or less, I forget which, than the one we have today. And also there are big discrepancies between them, according to Professor Bart Ehrman, who is an expert on the biblical text.
Yeah, so I guess my query was to the percentage, because I said 99%.
I don't know the percentage, but I get the impression from Bart Ehrman that it's much lower than that. And there's a popular myth that somehow the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed the Torah we have. Indeed, that he's quite clear that that's not the case. It is in some books, but not in others, and they're radically different ones. But also, to use your expression, it's a moot point, because the New Testament writers didn't use that anyway. They didn't quote from it. They quoted from an entirely different book called the Septuagint, which is an often extremely faulty translation of the Greek, of the Hebrew Bible. And esteemed scholars like James Barr from Oxford, who's a professor of the Hebrew Bible, have said that in many passages the Torah has been woefully mistranslated. It's a very poor translation. But that very wording has been used by the biblical writers, quoted, even though it's a very bad... So this would be an example of corruption, I would argue. The Quran doesn't say this openly or explicitly. I'm saying this. If you want to see how the Bible has been mistranslated and corrupted, look at the Septuagint and compare passages from that, which is used by the New Testament, that's its Bible, with the Hebrew Masoretic text. But there are other versions. There are many. There's the Samaritan Pentateuch. There's a Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which you mentioned, and there are other canons, and they don't all agree. There is no single Torah that we know existed. And so when we talk about the Torah today, it is a scholarly reconstruction. We don't actually have a fixed, clear, homogeneous, unified text that we've always agreed is the Torah. It's a scholarly reconstruction. So scholars typically will look at the Masoretic, they'll look at the Septuagint, they'll look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, they'll look at other... If you look at the NRSV, at the critical apparatus at the bottom, it often tells you where this translation or that translation, it comes to completely different manuscripts. And often, credibly, we had no idea what the words mean anyway. Often they'll say, meaning uncertain, meaning uncertain. We don't even know what the words mean. So when we talk about the Torah, it's a really, when you dig deeper, it's a really complicated subject. There is no single Torah. And just to reiterate finally, the biblical Torah used by the New Testament is often an extremely poor and inaccurate translation of the Hebrew, whichever Hebrew is used, and it wasn't the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was going to be something else. And it results in faulty quotes. So you have many of the quotes in the New Testament are erroneous and faulty, and there's a brilliant one in Hebrews I can mention, which is used to prove a point of doctrine, even though the original Masoretic doesn't say that. And so it's a very uneven and difficult thing to really talk about. So, so I'm not surprised the Quran talks like this.
Yeah, well, you said a lot of points, and I listened.
Please go.
So essentially, because when I was looking, well, basically,
he's a heavyweight too.
So I looked and it said, for example, comparative studies reveal word-for-word identity in 95% of the text, and that would be more against the Masoretic.
Oh, 95. Well, you said 99.
Right, and then I said 90. So let's just go with 95. But
okay,
you know,
so who is saying this?
I've just Googled, so I've just...
Yeah, but who is saying this? You can't just Google it. Google is not a biblical scholar.
Yeah, because I just don't want to sort
No,
of.
well, can we stick with Bart Ehrman? Bart Ehrman is a recognized world authority on biblical manuscripts. Shall we Google Bart Ehrman and the Masoretic text and see what he has to say?
Well,
He's very clear
Well,
that...
there's many other scholars, so he's...
No, but
we're
I'm
talking
citing
about-
a scholar. You haven't. You cited
Right.
Google.
Okay.
You could, Professor Google.
Yeah, I can give you...
So...
let me find the quote.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, paper boys. Right, speak up a little bit.
Yep. Okay. Let me see. So what I'm trying to do is find out the accuracy.
Do you agree with that characterization of Bart Ehrman's views on the...
I've not heard it, so I can't.
Yeah, well, shall we Google that now? Let's be clear what Bart Ehrman is saying on this issue. Then also, I think the more important issue here is the way that the New Testament quotes the Torah. It doesn't quote the original Torah. No one should dispute this. It quotes from a Greek translation. And the Greek translation, as scholars have been well aware, although most Christians are not aware of this, is occasionally really poor and mangles or misrepresents or even mistranslates the original. And this is not a point that Bart Ehrman alone makes. It's well known amongst Old Testament scholars. So if we're looking for corruption, I think it's the elephant in the room. It's not like what percentage of the Dead Sea Scrolls is faithfully transmitted to our translation. The New Testament itself quotes from a Greek translation, which is often very poor, and it mistranslates, mangles, or even deliberately distorts, I would argue. I can think of one example in Hebrews, which is an egregious example. I'll mention it to you, okay? It's a quote from the Psalms. This is Hebrews chapter 11, where the author of Hebrews 11 quotes a psalm to prove a point of Christian doctrine, which it says in the psalm, and I'm paraphrasing here because of the top of my head, that God gave his son a body, is the incarnation to inhabit, that God gave his son a body. So it's talking about the incarnation in Hebrews. But when you look at the original in Hebrew, it says nothing about that at all. It talks about a completely different subject. The point is this, and this is a standard observation, that the New Testament writers have used a distorted mistranslation to create Christian doctrine about the incarnation of Jesus. I mean, this is so central to Christian faith. It is based on a false mistranslation. So I would offer you that specific example for us to discuss now, because we can really hone in the detail of this and look how the New Testament has corrupted and mistranslated even the Torah they had at the time. So that's my challenge to you.
I'm starting off with because my question initially was about the Torah, not the New Testament.
No, it's the New Testament quoting the Torah is what I'm talking about.
But my initial point wasn't related to the New
But which
Testament.
Torah? There's a Septuagint, the Masoretic, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
There are lots of Torahs.
Yeah, so essentially...
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Your question didn't suggest complexity, but rather kind of a simplistic understanding.
That my statement was, when we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I have to find a percentage quote because it'll take too much.
I'm still waiting for it.
Yeah, it will take too long.
Well, I can wait.
Yeah, but
I'll
let's
wait.
have a
I'll wait for your quote, because you've made an assertion which you've not been able to back up.
Maybe just as a parenthetical...
So I said essentially 95% it matches up with the Masoretic text.
I don't know any scholar who says that. That is very different, because
I've seen
quotes along those
claims
lines.
like that, yeah.
claims, yes, but I'm saying that scholars haven't said this.
I haven't delved into who was making the claims specifically, but
It's a common claim. You're absolutely right, but it's fake news. It's not true.
the Dead Sea Scrolls are viewed very differently by Jews in relation to their texts they have versus how the Dead Sea Scrolls.
It'll take too long because there's too many links. So
Anyway,
I'll be here too long because I've been looking already.
No, Mike, we came back to what you asked me about the Quran teaches about corruption about the Torah. I'm saying that one example, they're not given by the Quran, which meets the Quran's allegation, is the well-known example in Hebrews chapter 11 where the Bible misquotes the Quran to prove points of Christian doctrine.
Yeah.
It's a really serious point, this. And I think that's a good example. They're not detailed by the Quran, of what the Quran is talking about nonetheless. And I'm offering this as something we can talk about now on camera to discuss what the New Testament has done to the Bible, the Old Testament, because it often misquotes it. And there are many examples. And Paul, for example, if you check Paul's quote, the Apostle Paul in his letters, with the Hebrew Bible in a good English translation, like the NRSV. What is striking about it, to me, is how often he misquotes it. He doesn't actually have, he leaves out phrases, or he gives a completely different meaning to it, or he lops off a crucial clause at the end. This is quite typical of Paul.
Yeah, but so this
is what the Quran's talking about.
But my initial question, because I was more concerned with the corruption of the Torah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
the corruption of the Torah in Christian writings.
Yeah, but I'm not at the moment concerned about whether Paul misquoted something or not. So
this is your New Testament.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I wanted to know about the corruption of the Torah, not whether Paul misquoted something.
No, the question is, did the Jews corrupt the Torah?
Yeah.
Paul was a Jew. Okay, you agree with that, don't you?
Yeah.
So we have an example here of an actual known historical Jew corrupting the Torah, and we have evidence in your hand now in the New Testament. And I can prove it to you if you'd just like to check. We can do this experiment now.
So what is your...
So I've given you an example of Jews actually corrupting the Torah, and you say, I'm not talking about that.
Paul was misquoting?
Yes. It's easy to demonstrate.
Right. So that's, again, but if he's misquoting, I'm talking about textual corruption.
So am I. So am I. There is textual corruption.
If misquoting
he's changing the text.
Misquoting, to be specific, what I'm saying is Muslims claim there was an original Torah.
Yes.
And at some point this got lost in history.
Well, that's not what I said. No, that's not true.
No, but
that's not true. That's not what I said.
I'm not saying that's what
I never said it got lost in history.
I never said you said that.
No, you said Muslims say that.
That's general claim.
No, they don't.
Because, okay.
Let's talk about what the Quran says, not about Muslims say. Okay. What does the Quran say? And I've given you four senses that the Quran talks about corruption.
Okay, the first question would be, was there an original Torah?
We all agree on that. So then, Moses existed, he received the Torah from God.
So then the next question was, there was textual corruption at some point.
Right. I'll briefly go through the four senses that I, as a non-scholar, I could be wrong, so I'm welcome Nazam to correct me if I get it wrong. The four senses that I understand the Quran is talking about this. One is the Jews orally corrupted it, tarif as it's called. And Paul, his own actions certainly come within this definition, where they verbally misquote or obscure or put their hands over passages. So we know this from the narrations of the time that they did this. Yeah.
Yes.
Another sense is actual textual corruption. Absolutely right. Tarif and Nas is also included in that.
My question was then, when did that part?
The Babylonian exiles, were the Jews in Judea, were they in possession, the remaining Jews, were they in possession of a scroll?
Can I just finish up this? Because there were four. The third one is, according to the Quran, an allegation made against the Christians as well, is that they have forgotten a good part of what they were taught to remember and to teach. So there's been a forgetting of the revelation as well, which is another form of corruption in my view, because you no longer have the complete version of the revelation. If people have just discarded it, forgotten it, it's no longer part of our collective memory. That's also a really important part of what I would call, you may disagree, I call that corruption. We no longer have the original text. That matters a great deal. The Quran claims repeatedly to be a muhammed, like a quality control over the text that Jews and Christians do have, and to have guardianship over it. So it can tell you where these texts say the Bible teaches something. We know that it's true if it conforms with what the Quran says. If it contradicts what the Quran says as the final pristine, uncorrupted, unlost revelation, then we know what the Bible says is a corruption. This is the fourth way, okay, that we can tell when it's false or corrupted, when it disagrees with what the Quran explicitly teaches. So for example, the Quran says, in my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, that Jesus was not crucified, although it appeared to them, the Jews, that he was.
And what does Baal say about that? Because you appealed to him earlier on as he's a sort of authority. What's his opinion on the crucifixion?
As a secular atheist historian who does not believe in revelation, he thinks that Jesus was crucified, yes.
Right,
absolutely.
Okay. So do you accept that?
No.
So why should I accept?
Because I'm using my own critical judgment here. Okay. I don't slavishly follow scholars when I agree with them,
but you
or when they don't agree with them.
To make an objection to me.
Do you know, because
as if he was
my answer to that is, and it's not an answer he would accept, my answer to that is, God knows better than Bar Ehrman.
Okay,
God knows better than Bar Ehrman.
Why are you giving me Bar Ehrman as an authority? That's my whole
Because
point.
On the specific question of manuscripts, he's a textual critic. That's his expertise. He was on the NRSV committee. He worked there with, Bruce Metzger, who was one of the most greatest textual scholars. God trumps Bart Ehrman every time.
Okay.
Bart Ehrman may be the most brilliant human being who's ever lived, but he's second to God.
Okay.
God knows better than Bart Ehrman. Do you know why? Because God is timeless and has a perfect apprehension of everything that's happened in the universe. Bart Ehrman is a fallible human being, and he has said, by the way, let me quote Bart Ehrman to you on this subject. He says, historical judgments are probabilities. We cannot know with certainty, they're probabilities. And he's right. They are probabilities, they're historical reconstructions. So he doesn't know for certain. God knows for certain because God knows everything. He's omniscient. That's my reply.
Just interject. Because I asked you this, I'm just going to ask more. Do you believe at the time? Do you believe at the time of your prophet that Jews were corrupting the Torah either verbally or both verbally and textually? Both. Okay. And the reason why, and you hear the question I would have asked you, but you had a different opinion, was this essentially because we do have, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls and like textual.
But the Dead Sea Scrolls are not the same as our modern Bibles in many important ways.
So when we get,
look at Jeremiah, for example.
Yeah, but when we get to establish, for example, what the proximity would be, my question would be: do we find those alleged changes of the Jews in any of the texts because we have some stability, even if it was?
We don't have stability.
So yes, we do.
No,
because in terms of the Masoretic text was one of the greatest finds because it highlights the stability of the Torah, which
no, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
But
that's why it was. That's why it's such a significant
absolutely,
find.
it doesn't. Which Torah are we talking about? Why do you privilege the Masoretic over the Pentateuch, over the Dead Sea Scrolls? There are many, and there are also many scholars. There are additional Torahs lost.
My question is essentially the same. Because if a Muslim believes that Jews were textually corrupting the Torah at the time, do we find those textual corruptions in any of the manuscripts that we have?
No,
because we should find, like, from the 6th century, 7th century.
See, it depends what you mean by textual corruption. I've given you examples where we give an example of Paul corrupting the Torah, by the way, which is a really important issue because he actually literally distorted and changed the words, which is what the Quran accused the Jews of. But it actually says that in the Quran.
Again, I've said my argument is textual corruption. So if Paul is saying he's gone to the Sanhedrin, opened up the Torah and changed the text. No, he didn't do that.
Yes, he did.
No, he didn't.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Shall we look at examples? We'll go through the examples. The one I've repeatedly given you,
because what he's saying is Paul would write.
Can I give you the example? The example I've given, which I really would love to go into detail.
But you're saying Paul would write his letters and misquote the.
No.
That is different.
I said when you multiple times when he quotes the Old Testament, you must have done this.
Where's he
you must have done this.
Testament?
I challenge anyone here.
In his letters.
If you look up Paul's quotes from the Old Testament,
in what book?
Hang on a second. In Paul's letters, when he quotes in the Old Testament,
so that's not the Torah.
Will you let me finish? When he quotes in the Old Testament, the Torah, repeatedly he misquotes it. He changes the words. That is corruption of the text.
Because it's different from faith.
Do you not think? Well, the one example I gave, another one from Hebrews chapter 11.
But do you believe that Paul corrupted the Bible? If it's like Paul,
no. But this is more interesting because you know the example.
The other one is Romans 11.
But Nazem, who's a walking, can we look at the text that Paul misquoted and compare? Yeah, we will then. Let's look at an example and we'll demonstrate how Christians have distorted Jews in the name of Paul, who's the most famous Jew of the 1st century after Jesus, how he actually physically distorted and changed the Torah.
Or what was he changing?
I can't look at his psychological motivation.
No. When I say that, I mean the text that you're referring to. What was the change?
Let's look at the change. We're going to look at examples now.
Isn't the Torah making more to do with
well, you
of the prophet?
You mentioned Romans.
Yes.
We're going to look at examples.
Because
demonstrate how a Jew actually distorted the scriptures.
You diverted from my original point. And
right.
But I want to hear what he says. But we'll go back.
In Romans chapter 11, verse 26, Paul allegedly quotes from Isaiah 59:20. He says in the Romans passage, this is Paul's letter to the Romans, the deliverer will come out of Zion. He will turn away godlessness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. And this is to do with the gospel, as Paul claims. When you look up Isaiah 59:20, it says the opposite. He is completely twisted the meaning.
But again, that's irrelevant of my point.
No, it is relevant. It's a Jew quoting.
I asked for
it's what the Quran says.
Textual corruption of the Torah.
Yes, this is textual corruption of the Torah.
I'm saying the actual. This is Paul's letter. So if he's misquoting or
deliberately,
twisting it, I'm not even making that argument because that's my argument.
Why did Paul misquote it so badly?
Why do you think? If he was misquoting,
why?
He's misquoting. My point was.
But why is? But you believe this guy's inspired possible
again,
of God, don't you?
Yeah, but my question was, when was the actual Torah corrupted? Because you agreed there was an original Torah.
I'm saying there are multiple corruptions and additions throughout history.
Right.
I've told you about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Let me ask you a question. What Paul's quotation, do we find it in the Torah?
Yeah.
So the Torah, if I go to the Old Testament now, do I find
yes? He's misquoted.
No, I'm saying.
Well, there's a narrow Torah, which is the Pentateuch, and a definition of Torah, which is the whole Old Testament.
Is not in the Torah. That means Paul hasn't corrupted the Torah.
No, he's misquoted.
Right,
he's misquoted.
That's not what my point was.
My point is, our point is that that's what the Quran is saying.
If the Old Testament,
but that's how you're saying a narrow Torah and a wider.
Yeah, the narrow is the first 5 books, and it has a. Hang on, don't interrupt. The term is used in different senses.
But the point they're making is a non-argument, because if you go to the Torah, he went back and changed. That's straw man in my point. Yeah, exactly. If the change was in Isaiah, then he's got a point. But my point is that because you can see the difference, they haven't.
I see. No, in that sense, you're right. But what I'm saying is, here we see an attempt to actually change the scriptures, which is exactly what the Quran accuses the people of the book of doing. We actually see an example of this in history. Now, there are other examples where we can't date it precisely, but we know because we have multiple Torahs that don't all match. The Samaritan Pentateuch is not the same as the Septuagint, it's not the same as the Masoretic text, and according to scholars, there are other Torahs versions which may be used, for example, by other writers, which we no longer have. So we don't have the Torah, just like the Quran says, that was originally given to Moses. We have different kinds of edited, corrupted, changed, forgotten parts of the Torah.
And this is where my argument comes in, and I can go to the Quran where it says the prophets were the protectors of the Torah.
Yeah, we know this.
So therefore,
say that the rabbis
and the priests maybe.
Yes.
Let me bring it up, because if you go to the tafsir, it also expands on that. It includes the.
Did you look up the Isaiah? I did.
Yeah. So therefore, because my point would then come to
if I can,
Jesus
yeah,
was alive,
I just want to look at another
corrupt Torah, because if we have, for example, some of the scrolls and we can see the consistency in the text, because it's not wildly different.
The Quran says God will teach him the Torah, so that implies that Jesus learned the Torah not from the rabbis, so to speak, but he learned it from God.
So
implies it was corrupt, so God taught him.
Say that again.
That implies that the Torah was corrupt.
No, repeat from the beginning.
Because the Quran says in chapter 3, God will teach him the Torah, so that implies that the Torah must have been corrupt.
So did Jesus teach the people that the Torah was corrupt?
Well, for example, when he cites the passage from 1 Samuel, he says Abiathar was king.
No, but I'm saying according to the Bible.
That implies that Jesus is quoting a different Torah from what 1 Samuel 15.
Yeah, but then if you're saying Jesus, but so you're conflicting two different things, because you just said that Allah taught him the Torah. So then if Jesus is misquoting the Torah, how could Allah have taught him the Torah? You can't use two different.
He's not misquoting. But how do you know Jesus misquotes the Torah?
He said Allah taught him, gave him Jesus the Torah, so therefore it would be accurate.
Yes.
But then if you're going to the Bible and saying that Jesus misquoted, then
so the Gospel writers are not eyewitnesses of Jesus' ministry anyway.
Because I'm using your.
Jesus disagrees.
Yeah, but
the Jesus of the Gospels disagrees with the Torah that we have present.
Yeah, but I'm more referring
a different version of that. You know when he says
I'm
Abiathar was high priest at the time when David.
Oh yeah.
But if you look at the Torah, it doesn't actually say that. It says someone else.
So who's getting it wrong here? The Torah or Jesus?
So I'm appealing to the Quran. Yeah. So that's why I'm asking these questions.
Can I share to you an example where?
Can I just finish my point, because I think you lost my point. My point was, and if you want me to bring up the references, my point was the Quran says that the prophets were the protectors of, including the rabbis.
It doesn't say that.
Where does it say that?
In the tafsir, you said in the commentary.
Can you quote
the meaning of it?
Can you quote from the Quran itself and not your memory of what it might have said?
Do you want me to get? Well,
that's what I've just asked you to do. Okay. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share with you the actual quote from what is traditionally seen as a letter of Paul. Hebrews chapter 10, not 11. I got the chapter wrong, but the example is there. For according to the author, for this reason, when he came into the world, he said, this is Jesus, sacrifice offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. Right? So according to, and this is a quote from the Psalm 40, verse 6 to 8. But this is a quote from the Greek translation, all right? So this is the incarnation of Jesus. A body you prepared for Jesus. The Son had a body prepared for him. Now, as this Bible, this is a Christian Bible, by the way, produced in the United States. As this Bible itself admits, this is cited according to the Septuagint, yeah. But if you look at the original reference in Psalm 40, can you see where it is there?
Yeah, Psalms 40 verse 6 to 8, according to the Septuagint.
There we are.
Yeah.
There we go. The original says, the Masoretic text, yeah, the Hebrew says, instead of saying, a body you prepare for me, it has ears you have dug for me. Ears that you have dug for me. That's what the original Hebrew says, but this Christian writer has twisted the meaning. And if you look at James Barr, he's professor of Hebrew at Oxford, he discusses this passage as one of the world's experts. And he says, in his view, that the translator has made a mistake. And as he's an expert in the Hebrew and the Greek, he can see where the author has made an error in the translation. But the point is that this passage, which supports the incarnation of Jesus, is fake. It's not real. It's this translation.
So let me just respond. So no, because I've got to go back to my original point.
I'm asking you a question now. How do you respond to that?
We're jumping because I said I'll.
Can you answer that point?
I won't, and I'll tell you why.
You won't.
I'll tell you why.
But you see, we're answering your question.
Yeah, I'll tell you why.
Can we have a bit of to and fro here?
Tell you why.
Can you, for once, answer one of our questions?
I will tell you why.
Can you answer one of our questions? Why won't you respond?
Yeah, let me speak.
Well, respond then.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Okay, I'm telling you why I won't respond first, because you asked me to read the verse. So I'm going to read the verse first that you asked me to find.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
And then you'll respond to that, yes?
I missed it because I was looking for the verse.
I'll repeat it. Okay, I had to repeat it to you.
I had a question because
Well,
you see,
I'm in the middle of a discussion.
Let me read the verse that he asked me to read.
And then you'll just address this one.
Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, and as did the rabbis and scholars by that which they were entrusted of the scripture. So here again, I'll just read it again. Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, as did the rabbis and scholars by that they were entrusted of the scripture of Allah. And this is from Sahih International.
So it doesn't say the prophets were given that task. That's not how I read it. That's not what you claimed it said at all.
So the prophet, if I said I'll go into the tafsir as well.
No, I want you to look at the passage.
Right.
What you've just said, that says is not what you
let's start
claim.
with the exegesis of the text. Indeed, we sent down the Torah, in which was a guidance and light. The prophets who submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews. So
I don't understand that English. Can we have another translation? Have you got another one? No, I don't. The English is very poor. The translation is not very good.
I'll give you
No, don't give me Pickthall. That's a Victorian translation.
Which one do you like?
Any modern translation.
Yeah, I've got a modern.
Here we are. We'll go with that one.
Yusuf Ali?
No, that's not. That's the 1930s. That's exactly 100 years ago.
Look at this is ridiculous.
Can we have a modern translation? Come on. We would choose the translation.
544.
Let's use a modern translation rather than these archaic.
Whose Bible did you read from? Because you picked that as well.
This is a modern Bible. This is a modern Bible.
So, which translation do you like?
We've got one. Do you want to read it out now?
Which translation is it?
It's a modern one.
Study Quran.
Okay.
Truly, we sent down the Torah, wherein is guidance and light, by which the prophets who submitted unto God judged those who are Jews, as did the sages and the rabbis.
Is that any different
from
what I read? Do you know what? Please read a different version, because people said he didn't understand that, which is exactly what I read.
Sorry, I was interrupted.
Please go to a modern translation.
No, because he put his hand over. I was trying to read it. He intervened.
Because he said he didn't understand.
I didn't understand your translation.
It's exactly the same.
Can we just back off for a second?
Okay.
That's with it.
Okay. Right, I understand it now.
From someone using the New Testament.
That's a different discussion. But that's a different discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a different discussion.
I have a question.
It doesn't relate. No, well, we're all laymen here. but we're having a debate.
My topic is
can I?
Why does this matter?
Okay.
But you're a Christian.
I don't know whether you
Yeah,
are.
but that's
Is
a
that all
different
right?
discussion.
I don't know whether you are.
It's a tangent.
It doesn't matter to you. That's
So now,
great.
how do you interpret that
Right.
verse?
I don't know. I would need to reflect on it
It
further.
says that rabbis and the sages who were given the responsibility
Yeah.
of preserving.
I don't understand why there's a big
And the
issue.
prophets were judging by it.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that they were responsible.
It doesn't say what you
Right.
claimed. You misrepresented, like
Yeah, I
Christians
can go.
seem
I
to
can
do
go into the
on the
tafsir.
text.
But as I said, but
Yeah,
again,
I'd like to see what the tafsir actually says.
Okay, yeah. But I'll go into the tafsir. But my point was, it says the book was sent down, the Torah was sent to Moses, which the judged by.
Yeah.
So that means you had a continuity, which would have gone all the way to Jesus. So that if you had the book from Moses, there's a continuity of something called the Torah, which went all the way to.
But what is your point?
Jesus.
I don't understand why this is significant.
Because you keep
So-
going on a
so
tangent,
what?
and I keep trying to explain. Then you keep going to Paul, and then you're asking me what's the
No, I'm asking you to
significance?
explain why this is significant.
Right.
I don't
so
see
my
what's the point.
significance is if we can actually stick to the topic and
well-
not go on tangents about the New Testament. I'll get to my point.
No, can I?
Because my point was,
Can I
was
respond to
trying
this?
say for half an hour. Because my point was this. My first question was,
We've been at this for half an hour. I'd like him to answer.
did the Jews corrupt the
Yeah,
Torah at
I've
the time
answered
of-
that. I've answered that.
I'm starting from the beginning, so we stay on track with what my point was.
Yeah.
So then after you said no, and he said yes.
I said
then
there were
went
4
to-
senses in the Quran,
Yeah,
as I understand
right.
it.
Then I said in the Quran it talks about, because I was talking about this verse, but I didn't bring it up. So I was trying to reference this verse to say this verse.
I know.
talks
We know
about-
all this. Moving
Right.
forward.
So therefore, my point was, when we have things like
Yeah.
the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yes.
for example, and we see a continuity in the text.
No, we
with the
don't.
Masoretic text.
I
we see
disagree.
stability.
I disagree. And you
Okay.
failed to prove that. You said
And you-
99% is identical.
Right.
I asked him to do it, and he's failed to provide any citation to a single scholar.
I'll do some fact checking.
So
Right.
you
Right.
can't claim that. You've
Right.
not backed up your
And
claim.
please find if the differences as well, if it's wildly different as what Paul said.
Well, I said some differences in some books, but not in others. My
Right.
claim is nuanced. Don't straw man me.
Right, so you don't know.
I do know.
No, in terms of the consistency of the
I
Masoretic
do,
text.
but I don't want to go into that. I want to go into my New Testament text. So
Yeah, but I had a-
let me respond now.
Yeah, but
Can
my-
I say something? You've been talking a lot in the last 10 minutes.
You asked me what my point is. Now you don't want to hear my point.
No, I heard your point.
What's my point?
Right, let me speak now. Right.
Yeah, but what's my point? You asked for the clarification.
Paperboy, can you just back off and not interrupt for 5 seconds? Can you do that for 5
You
seconds?
said you know my point.
I do.
Which is what?
And we've answered it in great detail.
What is my point?
And excuse me. Now, I would like.
You have to tell us your point.
Now,
Exactly, that's my whole point. He doesn't know my point.
I do know your point. You
What is
repeated it. But I would like you to address my question.
Has he answered
You
my-
promised that you would address my question once you had read that verse.
If you know my
had
point,
read that verse.
then you can just say what my point was.
No, I'm not going to play your game and parrot what you want me to say.
No,
My question is,
no,
why
you're trying
did
to- you're
why
trying to
did
go on a red- give a red
can you? This is
herring.
not a red herring.
Yes, it is.
Let me explain why it's not a red herring. Let me
was my
explain
point?
why.
It's a simple
Let me
question.
explain. Shh, let me explain. The accusation. This is very much germane about the Quran's claim that he has repeatedly referenced that the Jews corrupted the text of the New Testament, or they twisted it with their words.
Right.
There's multiple senses of tarif. It's not just one sense. It's multiple senses, and one of those senses is clearly in the Bible, in Romans chapter 9, which I read out just now, where Paul, a Jew in the first century, twisted the Torah exactly like the Quran says some Jews did. That's an actual example we can verify. No one doubts that Paul exists. No one doubts that they did.
He's defeated his own
Hang on a
point.
second. No, I'm not.
Because Paul is saying Paul misquoted the Torah.
Yes.
How does he know Paul wasn't quoting the original Torah that you believe in?
Would you like me to answer that? Let me answer
Yeah.
that. Look, he thinks he's made a good point here. Paul was a Greek-speaking Jew from Tarsus. He spoke Greek. All his letters are in Greek. He quotes from the Septuagint.
Okay.
That's the Bible he's quoting, not from the Jewish Bible, not the Torah, not the Hebrew Bible,
But how do
the
you know he
original.
wasn't?
Because Paul,
There's a lot of
excuse
how
me,
you
hang
know
on a second.
from your end, but he's actually.
Hang on a second. Let me
Because
finish.
his
Let me
claim
finish.
Is there was an original. So I'm saying
Yes.
then, if there
We
was
don't
an
have-
original, how do you know Paul wasn't
Because
quoting?
the original wasn't in Greek.
Paul was not quoting from the original. We know
But
that
we know
because
factually
hang
and
on,
historically-
dude, let me finish. We know Paul's not quoting the original because he's quoting from the Septuagint. If you don't believe me, see what the scholars here say. This is the NRSV, which is the main academic translation. It has no value for you.
That doesn't help.
Okay, it says Paul quotes from the Septuagint. The author follows the Septuagint text. So he's not quoting from the Hebrew original anyway. But what he does, even in the corrupted version, he changes that.
But this is the point. How does he know what's in the original?
Because the Hebrew Bible that existed at the time of Paul, like the Masoretic text, is different from the Septuagint.
But how do you know the Masoretic isn't the original?
How do we know that it is?
So you're making a claim that it's changed. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Your point is a non-starter.
No, it's not. Let me explain
because
how.
You would have to say.
I know the answer now.
Right,
okay, we'll go back to this. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, are believed by. You believe they're written by Moses, don't you?
Well, they were authored by Moses.
Well, that's what I just said. That's the same thing, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Moses lived what, 2000 BC, 2500 BC?
Yeah.
Would you be happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll say 2000 to be generous. 2000 BC. That's 4,000 years ago, right? What's the oldest copy of the Old Testament that we have in the world that exists today? What's the dating of that, do you think?
What's the oldest
copy of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, which Moses authored, according to you? I don't think he did, but according to you, the one we have is not authored by him. What's the earliest dating of the extant Torah that we have?
The full extant?
Yep. Earliest dating.
Off the top of my head, I know, for example, we have fragments of things, or not fragments, but for example, things. We have the silver amulet.
It's the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying.
What's the date of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Is about 2nd century BC.
Thank you.
Right.
Exactly right. So, remember what you just said.
Okay.
No, just follow. Let's follow this line of thought through very carefully. Okay. You have agreed that Moses lived about 2000 or even earlier BC. The earliest copy of that very Pentateuch we have, he thinks, in existence is 200 BC. Right. Do you notice the gap? What is the gap? My maths isn't very good. How many centuries is that, Nazem? Roughly. Sorry? 18. 1,800 years gap between the time of Moses, which he said is the time of Moses, and the earliest copy of the Torah we have.
Civilization.
1,800 centuries. Now, are you telling me that this was passed down accurately for nearly 2 millennia without any changes, any corruptions, any alterations? The thing is, we just don't know. We can have no confidence, zero confidence that the Torah we have today goes back to Moses, because we have no history, we have no isnad, nothing.
So that means he doesn't know whether it is or isn't the original.
We do.
No, you don't.
No, I'll tell you how.
If you said you probably don't know, therefore you cannot say.
We know with certainty. I make that claim with certainty. The claim is clear. When the Quran tells the story of Moses or any of the prophets, when it does do sometimes, this is the speech of God himself, who being a perfect omniscient being knows exactly what really happened. And let me finish, because you asked me how do we know. When the Torah we have differs with what the Quran says about the story of Moses, we know that the Torah has been corrupted, because the real story is in the Quran. That's how we do it.
Co-editor of Oxford's Encyclopedia of the Dead Sea Scrolls, says if the Masoretic version is the one and only true Old Testament, then the Dead Sea Scrolls are extremely good news for Bible believers, Jewish or Christian. The Masoretic manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls are astonishingly similar to the standard Hebrew texts 1,000 years later.
Thank you very much.
Proving that Jewish scribes were accurate in preserving and
Bart Ehrman says so who's this woman?
The same Bart Ehrman that says there was a crucifixion.
Lawrence Schiffman of New York University, co-editor of Oxford's Encyclopedia of the Dead Sea.
Bart Ehrman, thank you for that quote. Bart Ehrman.
Can you show the Bart Ehrman quote, please? Can you show the Bart Ehrman quote?
One moment, please.
No, you asked me for a specific quote.
Okay, I will in a minute. But in the meantime, I want you to address. I don't want you to get away with this, because I know you want to divert the subject away. If we have the Torah that you said was given to Moses 2,000 or longer BC, and the earliest copy of the Torah you admit yourself is just 2 centuries BC, how can you know that the Torah we have now is not being changed or corrupted in any way? There's 1,800 years difference according to your own calculation. How would you address that?
Well, there's 2 ways of addressing that. So one, it then removes the claim that Paul can make and say there was an original Torah, because by his own words he doesn't know either. So therefore, when we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, firstly, he will say before, but at least we can see a stability in the text from 2 BC until the Masoretic text, which is about 10th century. So a 1,000-year period, there's a very, very small disagreements, which Paul said actually according to the Ottoman, there was loads. So in terms of
1,000 years is a long time.
Exactly. So now he's talking about 2,000 years.
Coming back to the 2,000-year gap in records, how do we know it's reliable?
So now, in terms of the reliability, in terms of the text, can we know if there were any changes?
He just asked you, what do you think?
No, how do we know that? How can we know that a text which allegedly was transmitted without any evidence for nearly 2,000 years,
so this is
where it was preserved reliably and authentically intact?
So,
how can we know that? Is my question to you.
In terms of what the Bible, when I say the Bible, the Old Testament narrates, we have something called historical criticism, which the Quran doesn't have. Now, we then look at the reliability of some of the stories that it relays. So, for example, it makes claims about David. We find archaeological.
Is there a system to doing this?
No, in terms of the text.
Or just every individual chooses.
Talking about manuscripts. There's no manuscript evidence for nearly 2,000 years. How can we know it's reliable?
Right.
And
so
he says we can.
So I'm saying this in terms of the textual reliability, because we don't have anything earlier, we have nothing to compare it to.
Right.
So therefore,
so we can't know.
We can only base it on the evidence that we do have.
What evidence
and when
is
we
that?
have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which he quoted to the Masoretic
that's
text,
just 200 BC.
which is a 1,000-year period, and as he said, it's the similarity is almost exactly the same, very similar in the text. So we see a stability.
But doesn't agree with that.
So that's why I said if the Jews were corrupting the Torah in the time of your prophet, but we have a text that is stable, where were those changes in those in the Torah at that time? We don't see it in the Masoretic text. We see a stability in the text. So therefore, the claims in the Quran don't ally to reality or what we find archaeologically. Now, in terms of the reliability of the Bible, we also have things like archaeological evidence that validate many of the claims that it states.
For example,
Moses. Let me finish.
What about Moses, for example? What archaeological evidence do you have about Moses?
I'm going to just finish on one point, and I'm just going to show you guys something.
Also, you haven't really addressed the question.
Yeah, I said we don't have
a method of finding out what
because we don't have anything earlier. We've got nothing to verify it. But I said then the secondary method
nothing to verify.
is to look
so we can't know.
It's
quite a big. It's a lot of.
We have nothing to verify. So we can't know what the original is.
And the Masoretic
can't know what it is. Game over. Game over.
10 AD, 1,000-year period, and they're saying the text is very similar. Maybe a few minor differences.
No, there's some big differences.
Because it shows a textual stability.
Okay, let me respond to that now. The reason this is faulty is for many reasons. One is that, particularly in the medieval period, Jewish scholars became very organized as scribes, as translators, as copyists in guilds, and they became quite good at copying manuscripts in the later period of the Jewish era. So I'm not surprised that in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, 11th century AD, you do have a reliable transmission because you had these professionalization of the scribes in copying. But you can't, and this is why you're saying is invalid, you can't say, because it happened in the late medieval period, if we go back to 1000 BC or 1500 BC, you hang on.
We do have a fragment. It's not a fragment.
I haven't finished yet. I haven't finished yet. You can't then say, because they were professional guilds in the Middle Ages, therefore we can use that and say, throughout Jewish history, it's always been like that. No, it wasn't. In the earlier centuries, there wasn't this reliable transmission.
Right.
Coming back to the second point is, it's bad news, unfortunately, for you. If you're going to rely on historical criticism, and I tell you, when I was at university studying this...
It's bad news for him because his claim is there was an original Torah.
I haven't...
So can you let me finish? The onus is on the person making the claim
let me finish.
that there was an original.
You're saying historical criticism somehow backs up your claim. It doesn't. According to most Western historians, Moses didn't even exist.
Okay.
He's a fictional character. There's no... The fact remains, and I take no pleasure in this, there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever for Moses' existence.
Right.
Zero for Abraham, or in fact for most of the early prophets. prophets. Also, there's no evidence that Moses or Israel was ever in Egypt the way the Bible describes it. So there is no evidence for this, apart from the Bible, which has a nearly 2,000 year gap between the earliest manuscripts and the stories it allegedly describes. This is a huge
I don't
gap.
think he wants to acknowledge the gap.
No, he doesn't.
And let me
Mind the
just
gap.
address his
As you say in London
archaeological
Underground,
point.
mind the gap.
Because
Mind the gap.
You made some points. So now, in terms
Archaeology.
of
The system that held on to the authenticity during the 1800
Thank
years.
you.
That's all he wants to know.
Yes.
What did you have holding it in place?
Thank you. This is an excellent
It was the
question.
prophets. That's
Not
why
the Quran.
I asked-
According to
You
the
don't
Quran.
believe in the Quran. You don't believe in the
Yeah, but
Quran.
wait.
Argue from your own views.
This is why.
Don't talk.
No, but listen.
You're a Christian.
Let me make my point. This is why his arguments go against his own
I'm
beliefs.
asking for historical
Now,
reasons.
what's the system?
You don't believe in the Quran.
Let me address the historical part.
Thank
now,
you.
For example, not everything in history is provable. There are some things that are hidden in history, like Moses. But we have found something recently which is actually greater than the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that's the curse tablets from Mount Ebal. Now, if you don't know about
I
it,
don't know.
But this is not proving a system of authenticity.
Let's see what this great evidence is before
I'm
we.
addressing all his
Let's see what
points,
this great evidence.
because
Remember,
his
we got
point
a point of 1,800 years with no textual transmission
Now,
at all,
you say
and he
he's
says it's still
interrupting.
reliable.
So I'm addressing the archaeological
So
point.
what is the evidence?
Because so now, Mount Ebal was where Joshua went, and Joshua was the companion of Moses. Now it says, inscribed on a tablet of Agan lead, the curse in Proto-Canaanite script was a legal document, says a team that deciphered it using high-tech scanners. So it says, let me just show you.
What's this got to do with the manuscript transmission for
but
1,800
I
years?
said firstly,
I'm not denying Moses existed.
but
I'm not
wait.
denying Joshua existed. I'm saying
let me finish my
your
point.
text does not
You see,
support.
I listened to you,
but
and
this
then I
is-
responded.
But this is not really helpful.
I listened to you.
This is not really
right?
relevant.
It doesn't matter.
You're not answering the question.
Let me land and then respond.
Land, I like that.
So
I like that. It's a nice
it
metaphor. It's coming in.
says the discovery of a cursed tablet has unleashed an archaeological earthquake and could be a key clue in proving when and who truly wrote the Bible. The folded lead tablet, which contains a curse on the inside, was discovered on Mount Ebal in the Holy Land, a place associated with curses in the Bible.
Do you believe there was a curse in there?
Yeah, let me finish. It has been dated between 1200 and 1400 BC and features the Hebrew word for God, Yahweh, in what could be the earliest ever appearance. If the dating is correct, it may prove that the Israelites were literate when they entered the Holy Land and enabled to document the Bible events as they happened. Archaeologist Scott Stripling said it's extremely important. Some are describing this as the most important find of our lifetimes because it predates anything we have before regarding the Hebrew script. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this year, right? It was discovered this year. So the reason why I'm bringing it in is because his claim is that one, in terms of textual preservation. So I've already said we don't have anything earlier in terms of saying there's a consistency in the text, and I've conceded that. I've then said, well, the only other thing we can do to look at the textual preservation is look at the other thing we have, which is the Dead Sea Scrolls from the 2nd century BC
That's not
and the
system.
Masoretic.
That's not system. That's just an object.
Again,
That's an object.
again, my point is, then you would have to concede that there seems to be, from the observable
It's not
evidence.
about us conceding. It's about you making your point.
But again, let me make my point. My point is, if we have evidence, and from the evidence we can observe, there is preservation or stability of the text. The fact that you're claiming that it has changed, maybe I cannot prove it hasn't changed, but you can neither prove it has changed either, which was his point. So my initial question
He
to
can't
him,
prove it hasn't been changed.
Right.
Can we just remember this in camera? You cannot claim that it hasn't been changed. That this means, this is a really important point, you can have no confidence in the reliability and trustworthiness of your scriptures because you cannot know that they've not been changed. Game over. I've established my point.
Because
Thank you very much for your time. I'm going.
You can go.
Thank
That's
you.
fine.
Because that's all we